Let's move on to a couple other positions. I mean, at wide receiver, I highlighted two guys, partly because this is just an entirely new group, essentially.
Yeah.
So I ended up going with a couple of guys. Mind you, there are two or three more on this list. This almost is another position group where it's like, just list everybody. So I highlighted Eli Wood and Javon Robinson. Of course, they're the two guys that have the most production at the Division I level, which, I don't know, maybe that's a coincidence, maybe it's not. Maybe I gravitated toward players who have already shown some production at the D1 level. Javon Robinson, he caught, 58 passes for 600 yards. Of course, he was on a bad team that threw the ball a ton. So,
yeah.
Of course, the leading receiver on his team was a 1,000-yard receiver. So, like, he was the second guy and caught 60 passes for 600 yards. So there's some necessary context there.
Despite his size, he was still effective. And we've seen some Utah State receivers be undersized, but still be effective.
Yeah.
Like, that's not abnormal for college football, especially even guys wearing Aggie uniforms. But here's a guy that probably among the receiving core coming in is one of those that has the most production at the Division I level coming to Utah State.
Yeah. So, I don't know if he's really going to be an outside receiver or a burner. He didn't have a ton of like long passes. Granted, he still averaged like 11 or 12 yards per catch. So he's not like this 5-6 yard, per catch slot receiver that you can sometimes see. But, so I'm not 100% sure what role they're going to use him in. But for a guy who's, again, 5'7" and 155 pounds, he's small, very likely quick. And so it'll be interesting to see what role he plays. But I think a year where, like, I don't know, unless he's the guy, because there's a couple of the guys on Utah State who'd be the guy, especially some of these outside receivers. So I don't know if he's going to get to the 60 receptions, 600 yards landmark, but I think his impact will still be fine. Like, you could see his statistical production decrease from last year, but his impact on the offense and on winning actually go up. That's kind of what I'm thinking with Javon Robinson. That's why I think he's going to be an impact player. We'll see how the stats work out, but I think he'll be an impact player in his role.
Yeah, just a proven player. He knows how to play. He knows how to make plays. He knows how to make himself open for his offense. But besides him, I'm looking at Eli Wood and Rex Haynes. These are two guys that have maybe not quite as much, as many snaps as Robinson, but they have P4 experience, P4 development, and bigger bodies. And that could be really interesting. We've seen here recently where guys who have P4 experience, P4 bodies, but not a lot of P4 experience, come to Utah State and they finally get that experience and they really shine. And these are two guys that could fit that mold and could continue that tradition for Utah State.
Yeah, Rex Haynes is 6'4", 200 plus pounds. Eli Wood, I think he's 6'2", and about 200 pounds. Wood actually has some, like, for about 3.5 years. He actually started as a walk-on, I think, if memory serves. He was just a special teams guy, would occasionally get a snap or two at receiver. Through those 3.5 years, he had like a couple at Virginia. He had a couple of catches, like a touchdown. But then over like his final 6 games, he was actually like a third or fourth receiver in terms of production. I think he had 12 receptions for 162 yards and a touchdown in his final 6 games. So not like a ton. Although in his final 2 games, it was like 7 catches for like 100 yards.
He was like a hero in the end of the season in their conference championship game and their bowl game.
Yeah, I think he caught either a go-ahead or just it was a late touchdown reception in that ACC title game, though Virginia didn't end up winning that game. But he caught a touchdown pass. So he was starting to come along a little bit for Virginia. I don't know if that was because of injury or if he just outperformed people in the depth chart and kind of earned a few more of those snaps. But still, Utah State has found success in finding guys like Eli Wood. And again, I like how you bring in Rex Haynes as well, because he's another guy. I didn't really list him on this, but I think he's very much in that realm as well. These Power 4 guys who spend 3 or 4 years at a school, don't get any chance to be great receivers, then they come to Utah State and ball out. Had 2 of them last year with Brady Boyd and Braden Pagan. They go to guys like Siosi Mariner, like. There's been a history, and there's more. I just can't name off the top of my head. I know there are more than that. But Utah State has found those kind of players, and I think Wood and Rex Haynes are two players in that realm.
Yeah, and Haynes comes from Arizona.
Yeah.
So he's had some experience with the Wildcats, and but there's going to be a lot of new faces in the wide receiver room. But I think among looking at that group, there's some guys that were at lower level. There's some incoming freshmen. There's some things that are just we're not quite sure how it translates. But for me, these three that we've highlighted, these are guys that I think have the greatest chance of being alongside Anthony Garcia and having impact in the wide receiver room.
And shout out to Dimmick Starling, who is not technically a newcomer, but he was a guy who was probably going to be in line for first snaps last year, had a season-ending injury. He's back this year, so...
Yeah, he was one I was really excited about last year and bummed that we never saw him because he had injury, because a lot of folks were talking about how he's going to be an exciting playmaker. He was doing really well in summer before he had his injury and in parts of fall camp as well. So having Dimmick Starling in the mix, while he's been on campus for a full year, for seeing him on the field and perform, he should be considered among those newcomers. Yes.
I almost included him on the honorable mention section, but a notation that he's not technically a newcomer, but keep an eye out for him.
He kind of is.
So there's a lot of guys in this receiver room to be keeping an eye on. I had an honorable mention for Colin Romanowski, the Rhino fullback tight end. I think he's listed as a fullback tight end on the roster, but again, that Rhino position they've kind of invented mostly out of whole cloth there, where it's just he's a fullback, he's a tight end, he's something. And Romanowski, I think, will be leading there, though they have some other newcomers who are listed at that same position. I suddenly forgot the guy's name, but he was Mazdea, I believe. Tyler Mazdea, I think. He's a converted defensive tackle. So, but I think Romanowski, he's the one who brings the most versatility, where one guy is a converted defensive tackle and is probably in there for the fact that he's 260 pounds. Although they might have him lose a little bit of weight to go down to 240, 250, where Romanowski is. But Romanowski has caught passes, he's run the ball. He's someone who I think can bring more versatility, plus the blocking. Again, where he's literally played fullback. Mind you, it was at the Division II level, I believe. He's someone that's going to bring a little bit more versatility, and that I think we'll see a lot more of those snaps at that position and bring a lot of value to that, and obviously to whatever formations that he's a part of.
Yeah, no, I agree. They list him as a fullback tight end.
Yeah.
Stockton Pine is another one that's listed as a fullback tight end. So Utah State offensively will look very different this year with that big blocking lead blocker, fullback in kind of a power run situation for Utah State. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And so that's interesting to see just how effective that will really be for the Aggies. The other positions that I'm really interested in are the edge rushers and those outside linebackers for Utah State. That was a big area of focus in the portal and in this transfer class that Utah State has coming in. And so Jordan Pendleton is certainly one that stands out to me, a former BYU linebacker.
No, this isn't the former BYU linebacker. He has the same name as the former BYU.
Yeah, the same name as the former, BYU linebacker. That's true. This is one of those that is interesting to see. There's a number of these guys where they had a lot of experience at a lower level, and they balled out. And can that translate at this level? And last year, there were a good number of those guys, FCS players who had lots of stats, and they did a lot of things at FCS. But would that really translate at Utah State and playing Division I or FBS? And by and large, that answer was yes, they can. And so looking at Pendleton and a few of these other guys too at that position, I think that's something else to keep an eye on. Like, they were able to play. Like, these guys have a nose for the ball. They're physical. Their bodies are getting there. Can that still translate? And that's one of the positions to really watch. I think Jordan Pendleton is certainly one of those to keep an eye on.
Yeah, essentially four guys that I kind of highlighted, but I keyed in on Jordan Pendleton the most for reasons I'll get into in a second. But you have Pendleton, who comes from St. Thomas. It's Division II. Jeremiah Holmes. He's a 6'2", 235-pound edge from the Citadel. Adonis Jackson, 6'3", 265 pounds from Mississippi Valley State. So you got three guys that are, Division II or FCS. I actually forget which one each of these schools, if they're Division II or FCS. I can never remember. I think most of them are FCS. We also have James Jeanette, who's transferring down from Virginia Tech from the ACC. He's 6'5", 230. So coming, he's a transfer down. So he's someone who maybe has a little bit more, maybe raw talent, or at least was scouted to have more raw talent when he was coming out of high school, but now he's coming to Utah State. But Pendleton, I keyed in on him because while Holmes and Jackson both have a decent amount of snaps and production to their name, Pendleton was interesting because he came from a defense, and hopefully the move to Utah State, they'll be able to use him in a similar way that St. Thomas was. Because St. Thomas was one of the most disruptive defensive, and they were a good defense in general for their level, but Pendleton was like their most disruptive player. He led the team in tackles for loss. He led the team in sacks. He ranked 35th in his division among individuals. He forced 3 fumbles on a team that ranked 14th in the nation in causing fumbles. So it was an entire defense that was good at that, and he was their best player at that disruption. So Utah State, went to one of the most disruptive defenses at the FCS level, and they took their most disruptive player and added him to their roster.
Yeah, and so I wonder if he'll be like Tyree Morris last year for Utah State. I think that's a pretty interesting comp. Like, here's a guy who came from Lafayette, spent time at a university that probably most people didn't even realize existed. Lower level, but had opportunities to play and develop his body and mature. And now comes to Utah State, and he's an impact player for the Aggies. He had some great games for Utah State defensively. Yeah. And so Jordan Pendleton is one who can kind of follow in a similar mold where he was at a lower level school, but played for a team that had good defensive concepts and was able to impact a game defensively, and comes to Utah State where he can get even a higher level of coaching and more work with what he needs to do to be a real significant guy as they move into the Pac-12.
Yeah. Looking at the linebacker position,
Can we take